how would I explain the field of environmental psychology to a layperson? That's an important question, of course. It's an unusual field or unusual term for many people to encounter. But one thing I often start out by saying is that, well, we're always in an environment. You never see people outside of an environment. So if we want to understand human behavior, we have to understand what the environment means for their behavior. And so that leads into an explanation of environmental psychology as a subdiscipline of psychology that is particularly focused on the transactions or interactions between people and the socio-physical environment. Now, socio-physical is a word that also is raising a lot of questions. What do you mean socio-physical? And by that we mean to say that people are always in an environment that has physical aspects and social aspects simultaneously, that the physical may affect the social may affect the physical. So we want to talk about a socio-physical environment. So environmental psychology, I try to explain to a layperson, is the subdiscipline of psychology that takes interest in the transactions or interactions between people and the socio-physical environment.
What research questions do you investigate?
Well, I personally investigate quite many research questions within environmental psychology and the broader environment behavior design research field, and then also in fields for which you could say environmental psychology is an ally, particularly with regards to social epidemiology and the broader public health field. Questions that I'm particularly involved with have to do with the restorative effects of different environments. So if people have had a difficult day, if they're trying to unwind after work, how can they do that better in some places and rather poorly in other places? What is it in those places that really accounts for the difference or differences in how people recover from their efforts to meet everyday demands? So that's a kind of core set of questions. But then there are a lot of questions that unfold from that. So for example, there's a lot of interest in nature, the experience of nature, and how it relates to restorative experience. Is the natural environment a particularly supportive environment for restorative experience? That's a kind of question that also has a lot of profound public health implications. So in doing research on that question, I'm working often with medical geographers or social epidemiologists, and we're building bridges between environmental psychology and those fields, trying to develop more epidemiological understandings of the implications of contact with nature for public health. A theory that is important to me and important to my research, I would actually say that there is a conventional narrative that I have been involved with developing over these past decades. And that conventional narrative has to do with two different theories. So since I was a graduate student, I have been looking at attention restoration theory and a stress reduction theory. Attention restoration theory proposed by Stephen and Rachel Kaplan, and a stress reduction theory proposed by Roger Ulrich. And in looking at those two theories, I could consider, well, what do these different theories have to say about different kinds of outcomes, about different processes through which restoration can take place, and about the significance of different environments, particularly natural environments, in restoration. Well, the work with these two theories has led to what is now a conventional narrative in the field of research on restorative environments. It's quite typical now that people refer to these two theories and try to say something about their relative strengths, weaknesses, what they have to say about restorative experience. That said, it's a conventional narrative. It's a kind of story about how restoration can take place in different ways. It's important, I think, to mention that the theory that's important to me is the one that's not articulated yet. That we can, in our work as scientists, continuously try to identify the weaknesses, limitations, and blind spots of different theories, and that implies that there's a need for new theorizing. So attention restoration theory stress reduction theory, the conventional narrative, and the theory that has not yet been written. I would say that these are the theoretical concerns that I have. I have very good experiences with practitioners. It's also rather difficult. They ask questions that I'm often not prepared to ask. So, for example, they would like me to translate theoretical terms into terms of variables that they work with in their practice, and I'm often not able to do that. I'm not able to provide very specific kinds of recommendations that they can use in the work that they must do right now. Research and theory are often lagging behind very specific kinds of practical recommendations. But I often, in my work with practitioners, detect a goodwill, a willingness to work together, an understanding for the limitations of what researchers can do and can say.
Where can environmental psychologists apply their knowledge outside of academia, and what are the possibilities for pursuing a career in environmental psychology?
I think the possibilities for pursuing a career as an environmental psychologist are good. I think they should be better, because I think there's a demand for the knowledge that environmental psychologists have that isn't really recognized and isn't really addressed. But I do know environmental psychologists that are working active outside of academia, for example, working with government agencies, helping them to prepare reports on matters that have immediate policy relevance. I also know that there are people who have some training in environmental psychology and interest in it, who are working with different kinds of environmental design firms, for example, in landscape architecture and architecture. So at this conference that we're attending here in Groningen now, I'm meeting architects and landscape architects who want to update their knowledge in environmental psychology. So they do that practical work, but they're also engaged in the theoretical and research discussions of environmental psychologists, particularly having to do with restorative environments, those people that I meet and talk with.
So what are currently the most important and most interesting questions that should be addressed by researchers in the field of environmental psychology?
I think part of the answer to that question depends on where the researcher is now. Is it a new researcher? Is it a senior researcher? I think for new researchers it would be advantageous to, rather than look at what is the most popular question of the moment, to look at the roots of the discipline, to try and understand what are the common themes that people have been pursuing using one set of terms or another, and to try and extend it so that the discipline really is more of a cumulative science. I'm concerned that quite many people in the field have a rather poor sense of the quite long history of some of these ideas. I think the field would, the discipline would gain if we had more new researchers with a sense of history who are trying to, in a very deliberate way, extend the work on what has been a theme throughout. For example, a classical theme has to do with the demands that the environment imposes on the person, and a related theme is how people recover from the efforts to meet those demands. This sort of adaptational process is ongoing. It goes on through the course of a day, it goes on through the life. So perhaps a new and interesting question that could extend this classical theme would have to do with the implications of using certain kinds of environments for restoration from everyday demands, the implications of that kind of use for people's attachment to the environment, their identity, their personal development. We see this set of questions, set of issues around this theme addressed here and there in the literature in different ways. That would be an example of one area in which people could address a set of questions and bring things together, clarify this classic theme. And the discipline has a wealth of endlessly fascinating phenomena to address. And when we address those phenomena, we can really have some sense that we're doing something good, not just for our personal satisfaction, but for other people, and in fact beyond human needs, attending to the needs of a broader ecology in which all human activity is situated. So to the extent that we can gain satisfaction and be happy for that, I think it's an important source of motivation. And frankly, it is difficult to be a student of environmental psychology as for other disciplines. You do have to make sacrifices, but there is that source of satisfaction you can anticipate. It is important work to do. And I appreciate your interest in asking for my views on that.